About 10,000 years ago, maybe even earlier, a group of people lives near the ocean. They fish, they collect shellfish, they cook their food over a fire on the beach. One day, someone is cooking a piece of fish. They put it close to the fire, near the wet sand. Or maybe they are cooking in a shallow pit near the shore, and some seawater splashes in. Or maybe the wood they are using came from driftwood that had been soaking in salty seawater for a long time. When they eat the fish, it tastes different than usual. Better. They don't know why. They don't understand chemistry. They don't know what a mineral is. But they know one thing, that fish tasted really good. They try it again the next day. Same thing. Cook the fish near the salty sand, near the seawater. Better taste. They start doing it on purpose. Now let's go somewhere far from the ocean. There are places in the world where salt comes right out of the ground. In Africa, in Europe, in Asia. Salty springs, places where underground salty water bubbles up to the surface. Animals knew about these places long before humans did. Ancient people watched animals very carefully. They tracked where animals went, what they ate, what they drank, and they kept noticing something strange. Deer, goats, buffalo, animals would walk for hours, sometimes an entire day, just to reach a certain rock or a certain patch of wet ground. They would lick it, chew on it, stay there for a long time before leaving. These were salt licks, places where natural salt sits right on the surface of the ground or soaks into rocks near a salty spring. Animals need salt too, and they always knew where to find it. Curious humans followed the animals. They tasted the rocks themselves. Strong, sharp, not exactly pleasant on its own, but they kept coming back to these spots because the animals did, and hunters quickly figured out something useful. If you want to find animals, find the salt lick first, then just wait, the animals will come to you. So hunters spent a lot of time near these salty places. They built small camps nearby. They cooked their food there. Then one day someone hunted an animal right next to one of these salty springs. They cooked it nearby. The meat landed in the salty mud, or they rinsed it in the salty water without thinking much about it. When they ate it, better taste. Once people figured out that salt made food taste better, they started collecting it on purpose, and they got creative about it. In China, there is evidence that people were collecting salt from dried lake beds at least 6,000 years ago. Yuncheng Salt Lake in northern China is one of the oldest known salt harvesting sites in the world. When the lake water dried up in summer, it left a white crust on the ground. People scraped it off with flat stones and used it on their food. In Europe, people around 6,000 years ago figured out a different method. They found salty spring, underground water that bubbles up with a lot of salt in it. The spring water itself is not solid, so they had to get the salt out of the water somehow. They boiled it. They filled clay pots with the salty spring water and held them over fire. The water slowly boiled away, turned into steam, and disappeared into the air. But the salt stayed behind. It could not evaporate, so as the water level dropped lower and lower, the salt got more and more concentrated. Eventually, all the water was gone, and at the bottom of the pot was a thick crust of white salt. They scraped it out, let it dry, used it on food. In Africa and the Middle East, people collected salt from the edges of salty lakes. As lake water evaporated in the heat, salt was left behind in flat white sheets along the shore. All you had to do was scoop it up. In the Sahara Desert, there were places where ancient lake beds had dried up completely thousands of years ago, leaving enormous flat plains of solid salt sitting on the surface of the ground. People chipped it out in blocks, big heavy blocks that could be carried and traded. Everyone was figuring it out at roughly the same time in different parts of the world, different methods, different tools, same result. At some point, people noticed something else about salt, something even more important than taste. Salt keeps food from going bad. Meat went bad very fast. You kill an animal today, and in 2 or 3 days it starts to smell. It starts to rot. You cannot eat it anymore. That was a huge problem for ancient people. But if you pack meat in salt, or rub salt all over it, it lasts much, much longer. Nobody planned to discover this. It probably happened because someone stored their salted food and noticed later that it still smelled fine, still tasted good, while the unsalted food nearby had already gone bad. This was an enormous discovery, because now you could store food. You could save meat from a big hunt and eat it slowly over time. You did not have to eat everything right away before it went bad. Because salt was so useful, it became very, very valuable. In ancient Egypt, workers who helped build tombs were sometimes paid in salt. The Roman army sometimes gave soldiers salt as part of their pay. A soldier who did his job well was said to be worth his salt. In ancient China, the government controlled all the salt. Only certain people were allowed to make it and sell it. Salt taxes became one of the biggest sources of income for the Chinese government for thousands of years. Smuggling salt, selling it illegally, was a serious crime. Some people were executed for it, but nowhere in the world shows the power of salt more clearly than the city of Timbuktu in West Africa. Timbuktu sits in the middle of the the Sahara Desert. There is almost nothing around it. No river, no farmland, no ocean. By every logical reason, a major city should not exist there, but it did, and for hundreds of years, it was one of the richest cities on earth. The reason was salt. Just north of Timbuktu, in the deepest part of the Sahara, were massive salt mines. Workers there mined enormous slabs of salt from the ground, loaded them onto camels, and walked them hundreds of miles south through the desert to trade. Those salt slabs were traded for gold, food, cloth, and everything else. Salt built that city. Wars were fought over salt mines. Kingdoms rose and fell because of who controlled the salt supply. Salt was literally worth the same weight as gold. All civilization used it. All of them figured it out on their own, without talking to each other, because the clues were everywhere. Salty ocean water, salty springs, animals licking rocks. Nature kept leaving hints, and eventually humans kept finding them. That tells us something. It tells us that ancient people were smart. They were paying attention. They were watching, tasting, experimenting, and remembering what worked. They asked, even without words, why does this taste better? Why does this last longer? How can I do that again? And they figured it out.